So in this video, I'm going to go over everything that you should need to know for the basics of how to install a device gateway onto your local device, as well as set up your access control policies and everything on the Fuse Cloud side to allow that device to communicate with the Fuse Cloud system. So a couple things to note. First of all, device gateways are specific to the Fuse enterprise that you're installing them on. So let's say you have a build instance, a QA, or sorry, let's say a build enterprise, a QA enterprise, and a production enterprise for Fuse. Each one of those will need a separate device gateway installed. So you need to repeat this process basically every time you want to move from build to QA to production, and so on and so forth. Additionally, it's recommended to only have one device gateway per device. So yeah, basically can't share a gateway to have it communicate with QA and production both. You would need separate gateways for QA and production. But yeah, with that out of the way, we can get into installing the gateway. So that is done by navigating to System, Internet of Things, Fused Apps. If we expand these, we have a couple different options. You're going to want to look at the Fused Device Gateway Service. And we have releases for production, we have releases for QA, and we have releases for build. So if you want to find the specific version for the production or QA or build instance, whatever you're working on, and anything here you can use. Just depends on. Generally, recommend just grab the most recent one unless there's some specific issue with that you're aware of. But yeah, pretty much start with the most recent one. Expand all the way down and you'll get your .exe file. You just click on it and it'll pop up and download. And then if you open that up, it'll attempt to install it on your computer. Before we get there, we can start looking at the API keys and everything that you'll need to use to have the device talk to the Fuse Cloud. So I have installed it from this tenant, which is called Highbar MES. The Fuse tenant infrastructure is set up such that there will always be an administration tenant and then custom tenants for your applications. Depending on what you're doing, you may have just two tenants, the admin and your custom tenant, or you may have many, many more. But basically, you'll have to configure access control policies on each of your custom tenants and assign your API user permissions on each of your custom tenants. But you'll create an API user or a gateway user from the administration tenant. So for starters, we'll go to Hypersteel Administration. And from here, we'll go, you can just search, click into the search bar and look at enterprise users. And we're going to hit the plus to create a new user. Your email, you'll probably want to set this up to something that has distribution, an email distribution for you to listen to, because you will potentially get error email sent there. I'm just going to use my email in this case, just as an example, but you may do something like, say you're working for Acme, right? So your email would be like gateway@acme.org, and then you would just have like an email distro list set up to listen to emails that go here. I'm just going to do okay. It'll have to be active for the first name. You can just give it gateway user. Not even necessary to give it a name. Hit the next. Your access type is the important one here. You'll need to make sure that is set to gateway access. And then the home tenant is going to be the tenant that you're wanting to set up access for. You can have one user access multiple tenants, and you can assign multiple API keys to that user, which will be how you tell it which tenants, or how you pick the tenant that you're logging into. We'll get into that in a second, but for now, basically the point is if you have multiple tenants you're trying to communicate with, don't worry about this part too much. Just pick one of them. Don't set an access expires at, or do, depending on your security concerns, and then the level of your inactivity. So after 90 days, if this key doesn't log into Fuse, the access will expire and you'll have to come create a new key. So something to keep in mind. If you have some development or testing that you're doing that may be longer access, you can set it to longer, or if you're in production, you may want to set that to lower. You can hit plus at this point. It will say it sent a link. You can ignore that. Don't need it at this point. So I have my Evan testing gateway at Fuse.com user here. The next step will be to create an API key for that user. So over here on the Enterprise Admin menu, if we go down to Access Control, there's a section called API Keys, so we can click on to that. And here's where we'll actually create our API keys. So I'm going to go ahead and find my user that I just created. From this screen, actually we'll go ahead and hit the create button. Sorry, on the API keys. From here, we'll create a new user API key. Go and hit the plus sign. Give it any name that makes sense. You'll select the tenant that you want it to access. So this part's important. This is saying this API key is only going to be able to access that tenant. So this is how you designate the API key. And then you'll have a separate API key for each tenant, and you just create them as needed here. And then the user is going to be the user that we just set up. So in this case, Evan testing gateway at Fuse.com. So again, that's the gateway user access type. When you hit the plus sign, it's going to show an API key, which will only be shown on this screen. So you have to make sure that you copy this and keep it safe, like it says. So go ahead and copy, and we'll store this for later on. Last note is that in order to set up this API key, you do need to be a user that has the administrator access type and has access to this to the administration tenant. You may just need to ask an administrator to create an API key for you using these instructions if you don't have that access. Next, your access control policy will need to be configured on the tenant that you're trying to access. So in this case, I created my API key for this HighBar MES tenant. I'm going to click into that one. And we'll need to go into our access control policies. In this case, I have a access control policy already set up. If you don't have an access control policy for API access, probably need to contact Fuse support and get them to set that up for you, or you can configure it yourself if you are already trained on how to use the access control policy editor. But basically here we have the ability to say, hey, this policy gives access to these resources. I can fire these connectors, so on and so forth. In this case, this policy grants full access in the QA environment. So we can take this policy and we can go ahead and attach this directly to our gateway user. So from our API access policy, tab over to attached users, hit create, select the user we are connecting, and then once that's added here, that grants this user access to everything that the policy has in Fuse. So that's all of the access control policy configuration that you'll need to do, assuming that you already have your policy set up. So then the next step is to go ahead and install the gateway in Fuse and install the drivers that you need to access, which we'll go over next. Okay, so once we have all of that set up, we're going to go ahead and on our local device, we're going to install that gateway that we downloaded earlier. So go ahead and open that exe and run the installer. Most of this is going to be pretty straightforward. We're just going to keep all the default options on. So it's installing the FuseDevice gateway and enabling the gateway service, which we'll show in a second. And pick the location install. I have a projects folder. That I will install my gateway into. And we'll just go ahead and hit finish. If I pull up my services, I will now see a Fuse device gateway. And if we told it to start the service, it will be running currently. First thing we need to do is actually log into the device gateway on the local device, and then we'll see it up in the cloud. So go ahead and log in at localhost 5500. That's the default port. And this is where we're going to use that API key that we created earlier. So in order to log in my case, it remembered me because I had the API key already installed, I believe. I'm going to go ahead and sign out just to show it. So I'm going to grab the API key that I just created, and I'm going to use that to log in here. Okay, and I'm here in my local device gateway, and from here I can complete the rest of the configuration. So depending on what you're wanting to do, you'll want to you'll want to install a new device driver. We have a bunch of different drivers to choose from. So if you're trying to install a MySQL driver, you do that here, or just like an HTTP client, you do that here. Go ahead and install the drivers you're interested in. Once the drivers are in, then you can complete the rest of the setup. Once your drivers are in, come up to the devices section. We'll add a new device. Pick from the driver that you have installed. Hit the next. Give it a name. Give it the base. And so in this case, I'm filling out the driver for an HTTP client. Each driver you do is going to be a little bit different. There'll be different config options available. In this case, our base URL is the URL that an HTTP request would come in to the HTTP client at. So, for example, depends on how your app is configured, but you may do http://localhost and some port, any port that you have configured for your app. And then path to endpoint, for example. This could also just be an IP address. You could have the HTTPS protocol. But yeah, it really depends on what you're installing. But yeah, once you have that, you can go ahead and add the device. And if we refresh here, we'll see I have an HTTP client set up. And if we look back at the cloud under my device gateways, it's a little confusing because I have a bunch of different ones. We have a bunch of different ones here, but this is the one I just added. We can see that it was last updated at 2:34, which is a minute ago. Just a time zone difference. That's the one that we added, and we see that my device is here with the test HTTP clients. It's refusing the connection because I don't have anything here on my local device, so it's throwing an error, which is fine. Next, if we wanted to, there's a few different things we can do from the cloud. We can test that the cloud can communicate to the device gateway by hitting the test button. You can run a function that just says, for example, get the gateway status, just to see what's going on down there. Step. In this case, the gateway is up and running. If I show my local device gateway service, I'm going to go ahead and stop the service. I'm going to go ahead and try and run that function again. Get gateway status. It's going to run for a while trying to get the status. We'll time out because it took 10 seconds and it didn't get anything back because the service is no longer running. Additionally, if I look at my my device gateway devices, so looking at that, in this case, just the HTTP client, that's the only one we have. You can see my status here. From here, I could also add an additional device. Yeah, and then back on the local client, you can see that I see the same status messages, and I have pretty much the same options here. I could try and make the HTTP requests from here, and again, all of these functions will vary depending on the driver that you're running. But just to show, I can also fetch the status as well. In this case, it's going to throw an error again because I don't have the service running. And if I go ahead and turn my service back on, I will get a different error that's saying timeout exceeded. But if I go back to my services, I can start the gateway. Go ahead and test the status again. When you restart the service, web page reloads as well. Forgot about that. So now when we're testing from the gateway, it's going from the gateway to this local endpoint rather than from the cloud to the gateway to that endpoint. So just a note, you may see different functionality. It looks really similar, but there is, a layer in between when we're requesting from here and then when we're requesting from here. But just to kind of show the examples, the other thing to note out is under the setup tab here, there's some different configs you can set. So I have, for example, log levels. Probably want to go ahead and set that to verbose. You can set a notification address. This is great for production. Might not want to do that for development. You'll probably get blown up. The number of days you want to retain logs for. And then the sync intervals, I want to set that to like 10 seconds, I would recommend. Do want to make sure we have that set. Basically, every 10 seconds is when it'll try and sync from the gateway up to the cloud. The only other thing I have to call out here is that your log files are going to be stored where you installed the gateway at. So in my case, I have in my projects folder, I have my Fuse Device Gateway folder. There is gateway logs here in this gateway service wrapper.wrapper.log. You have an uninstall to get rid of it if you need. Your gateway service wrapper.xml gives you some config. You can change this. Like, for example, you may need to change that if you're trying to configure a certificate authority that isn't supported out of the box. And then, yeah, there's also a crash log file. There are some other times you may need to come in here, like, for example, if you're using store and forward, which is when you're trying to support for internet outages, we'll create a SQLite database here, which will keep track of all the requests that would have gone out. And when your internet comes back on, we'll pop those requests off of the database one by one. So there'll be an additional file here that shows those local requests. But yeah, that's the Gateway 101. There's a lot more, obviously, that goes into it, but that's kind of the starting point for working with the gateway.